Can you see it on the Zoom? Okay. I would go to the quiz. And the quiz did exactly what I wanted it to do. And what did I want the quiz to do? To fail all of you on the question of the covenant. That was my first goal. Have anybody solved it from the first time? From the first time, you got it right? I'm impressed. Then I didn't succeed, actually. Some people got it first, right? So let's go through the question. The best description of the Bible is the record of God's revelation, the record of the salvation history, the story of the church, all of the above. And most of you got it right. It is all of the above. What is the relationship between the church's tradition, and the Bible? A, the Bible is the book of the church, and church tradition is how to understand it. The Bible is made only of personal messages from God to everyone. What's wrong with this one? It becomes relative. There is not a very standard thing that God wants to say to everybody. It's not going to become the book of the church. It's going to become the personal book of everyone that God wants to talk to everybody differently. So you might be saying something to someone, might say the opposite to somebody else. That's not what the Bible is. The tradition is another way of divine communication to the church. Is it another way? Of course not. We said, what is the place of tradition? We'll talk about it in a second. The Bible can be understood clearly without the church or the tradition. And we said, this is where we're going to have a problem. That's why you have too many denominations. Everybody takes the Bible and gets excited about one point and runs off with it to make a new denomination. Somebody gets excited about service, somebody gets excited about spiritual life, and every denomination comes with a focus on one aspect. That's again not right. Nobody can understand the Bible in its entirety. This takes, as God gave it to many authors to write it, we said more than 40 authors, not a single person can actually interpret the whole Bible. This has to be the job of the church. So the first one is the correct one. And I give you that idea from the book of Acts, when the eunuch was in his chariot and we're going, and St. Philip came next to him and he heard him read Isaiah. And then he said to him, do you understand what you're reading? What was the answer of the eunuch? How can I understand if somebody doesn't explain it to me? So Philip, who is a deacon, and he's part of the apostolic church in the first century, he had the right explanation of that verse that he was reading from Isaiah, from the church, from where they were with Jesus, and they had the explanation of that verse. So the Bible is the book of the church, for definite. This is what the Bible is. And church tradition is how to understand it. So because it's the book of the church has tools of explaining the Bible. What's the best tool? I told you. The best tool of all the tradition? Liturgical rites. You want to really live the Bible, understand it. The more you read the Bible and the more you know the Bible, the more you get involved in liturgical worship and understand becomes very vivid. The Bible is three-dimensional. I know that a Bible scholar one time from a Protestant, he was Presbyterian, went into the church in Vespers, and he was blown off. He was just flabbergasted because he said, this is from Genesis, this is from Psalms, this is from, and he kept the Bible came alive to him as he is listening to all the liturgical rites because he knew the Bible very well. Comes my favorite question. And no offense, everybody, you need to know that question very well. A covenant is a legally binding contract between two or more parties. What's wrong with this? Okay, we said that an example of covenant is adoption and marriage. Let's take marriage. So marriage can be a contract, can be a covenant. What do you exchange in a covenant? A husband and wife come and say, I'll give you myself, you give me yourself. Let's turn this into a contract. Contract doesn't involve self. So have you ever seen a legal binding document that talks about I give myself? Even slavery doesn't do that. There's no slavery contracts. So it has to be goods. So let's turn marriage into a contract. What happens in a marriage just as a contract? The husband is a wealthy man. He says, you beautiful girl, I want your body. And she says, what are you going to give me? My money. Okay, let's sign it. What's that? You want to hear the name of it? It is prostitution. So when you turn the marriage covenant into a contract, it becomes awful. It's not the same. The second one, an agreement between two persons entailing rights and obligations. Isn't that what is a covenant, a contract is? It's an agreement. We make an agreement to sign it. And we have some rights and obligations. My right is to take your money. And your right is to take my body. Again, what's that? It's another way of saying a contract. A contract is an exchange of goods with material penalty. Like if you don't give me what I paid for, so you go to the car dealer today and you sign a contract to buy a car. And the car dealer says, we don't have the car today, come tomorrow. We come tomorrow? No, not today, not tomorrow, not today. Next week. What happens after 2 weeks, 3 weeks? You start feeling that the car dealer is robbing you. He took your money and is not going to give you anything. What are you going to do? You go to court. You sue the car dealer and you get your money back with penalty. That's called a contract. It's agreement between two persons or parties or entities entailing rights and obligations. I have something to give and I have something to take. That's an exchange. That's a business exchange. The third one, a family bond with blood and flesh ties. Leave that aside. I'm not going to talk about that because that's the correct answer. And everybody says, oh, what's this? How can it be the correct answer? Adoption doesn't have flesh ties and blood ties. Marriage doesn't have flesh ties and blood ties. Does it? And the last one is a business exchange of goods. Again, what's that? What I said actually in this, I put you a contract in 3 different ways. And I put one statement that is actually a covenant. Why is a covenant a family bond with blood and flesh ties? And this is where I think, if you don't get this question, and if you don't get the understanding of it, we better quit the course right now. We better finish it, really. If we don't understand this point about the covenant, we better stop here and find something else to do. Maybe play domino. Do something else, something more useful. Why? Okay. From now on, you're going to study all the covenants, the 6 of them, and every single one of them has to do, there is no way around it, with sharing flesh and blood. I'm going to say it again. Every single one of them has to do with sharing flesh and blood. Maybe the first one is not very clear, but all of them, without exception, it has to be flesh and blood. In the Old Testament, the first 5, the flesh and blood used to be shared is an animal, a sacrifice. That always in all the covenants has to be a blood and it has to be a flesh. And the flesh usually is shared. They eat of it. So when the 2 parties of the 2 kings come together, they say, we're enemies, but we want to be family. What should we do? They said, okay, let's get a calf or a cow, and we sacrifice the calf, and we dip our hands in the blood. Now they're sharing what? The blood, and then they eat from the flesh. So they had, through the animal as a substitute, shared flesh and blood. And by this, they understood, if they betray each other, they should be killed like this or be cursed like this animal. The animal took their place. You're going to see it all over the place. And if you don't understand this, please stop and ask a question. So we're going to see this in every one of them. You're going to start from Noah, seeing the sacrifices. Noah, Abraham, and every one of them. To the degree, I'm just going to make this very quick remark from the book of Exodus. When God made a covenant with Israel, they came to Mount Sinai. And at the foot of the mountain, I'm going to show you the picture of this beautiful altar they made. Still exists till today. An altar was made. They brought hundreds of animals. And the firstborn of Israel took the blood of those animals in a basin, in basins, many basins. So Moses, at the end of the covenant ceremony, wrote the commandments of God on a piece of paper, on a parchment, maybe a papyrus. And he took a zophah, which is a branch or a plant with many thin filaments, and he dipped it in the blood. He sprinkled it first on the book, and then he went and sprinkled it on the people and did say what? This is the blood of the covenant that God had made with you. So that covenant has to do with blood, and they shared in the sacrifices. So that is the flesh. So all the covenants. That's why in the New Testament, which we need to understand very clearly from the beginning, you are the flesh and blood of God. You. How? How you, each one of us, actually share the flesh and blood of God? In communion. You want to tell me that you're not the children of God, really, flesh and blood? You'll be denying something very powerful that God. He sent his son to take a flesh, to take human being form and have a spirit and have blood. And when the son took it, was it somebody else, that flesh and blood? Or was it Jesus, flesh and blood? It was his. When he broke it on that Thursday and gave it to the disciples and says, take, eat, this is my body. When he came to the cup, what did he say? Take, this is the cup of the blood of the new covenant. So is a covenant involves blood and flesh ties or not? Yes, it does. From the Bible point of view, it does. It's not just a legally binding. Think about it legally. Adoption, yeah, you can say it lacks that sacrificial part. But what about marriage? Let's talk about marriage. Is marriage flesh and blood or not? Absolutely. When the two husband and wife become one flesh, this is why a marriage is not really a marriage. You can have a girl and a boy or a man and a woman get married in the church, but they never sleep together in the bed. You know what the church says? Their marriage is not complete. They can actually separate as if it never happened. They had to sleep together. Once they sleep together, what are they? They're one body, one flesh. They share one existence. Adoption, you can think about it this way. When they share a meal together, they are actually building the same body. This is a little bit more remote, but more of a marriage type of thing when you come to the covenant of the Bible. It's a marriage. It's a binding of two to become one, the same flesh and same blood. That's, I think, is the most important point. If I can make any point that would help you in understanding the Bible, this would be it. So what are you? You are truly the children of God. You are his flesh and his blood. Absolutely. God looks at you and see what? His flesh, his blood. Because the same flesh and blood is in Jesus. It's exactly the same. All right? Yes. That's one of the covenants. So I'm going to talk about circumcision when we come to Abraham. I'm going to answer that question. The sacrifices in the flesh of Abraham, but it had to do after many other sacrifices. Was one of the things in the flesh of Abraham and his descendants. That's one of them. Again, it is flesh and blood. Yes? Yes. So there is this sharing, and in the book of Hebrews would say this, as the children had shared the blood and the flesh, he also came and shared their flesh and blood. That means Jesus. So that he would take death on himself, and through death he would cancel the work of the devil and bring us closer to God. To bring us closer to God, to make us God's children. The making of a covenant requires all the following except swearing of an oath. Does it? Yes. Promises and obligations. Yes. Loyalty. Yes. Exchange of goods. No. No exchange of goods. Imagine you are a child of your father or mother. And would he say, your father, I'm going to give you breakfast today. How much money you have? Does that make sense? Or a husband says to his wife, prepare yourself, we're buying you a new car. See how much things you have inside there so we can sell them and get the money for the car. It's not. No, that's not. So there's no exchange of goods in a covenant. You don't make an exchange of goods. But what you do swear an oath, you do promises and obligations. Remember how the scene, I mean, this is the one that you're familiar with. When you stand in front of the altar, husband and wife, what do? You know what they do? I don't know if you see it. They put their hands on the Bible, and we cover their hands. And the priest will tell them the commandments. You take care of her. You be kind to her. You take care of her after her parents. You listen to him. You respect him. And these things are given as commandments as they put their hands on the Bible. What does putting a hand on the Bible mean? Swearing an oath. Okay? And also has promises and obligations. Like, I promise to do things. It does have that. Loyalty. Absolutely. When we break the loyalty in marriage, we call that what? Cheating. Cheating. When a husband looks at another woman, or a woman tries to befriend another man, that's called what? Cheating. Exchange of goods, we said no. That belongs to what? To a contract. We're not talking about a contract here. I want to tell you why people, especially couples, come from Egypt, have a problem with the covenant. Why do they have a covenant problem? Because they are growing up in a Muslim culture. Do you think the Muslim knows about covenants that much? No. What's marriage for a Muslim? If he can marry 4 women, what is it? If a man can give himself to a woman, can he give himself to another woman? Can you give yourself to 6 women? They are giving themselves to him, but he is not giving himself to any. That's why he keeps himself there, and he takes. This is not a covenant. All what he's doing is just spending money on them, having children or whatever, and that's all. So it's almost like a contract. That's all about the contract thing. That covenant idea of giving oneself to the other is not there. The next question. Church tradition is expressed in all the following except consensus patrum. It's actually, the I is wrong. It's consensus patrum. There's no I. Consensus patrum. Liturgical rites. I have an I here or not? I can see. No, it's patrum. Consensus patrum. Liturgical rites, sermons, ecumenical councils, creeds, and canons. What is the church tradition expression? It's all except what? Sermons. Sermons can or cannot be at church tradition. It can focus on church tradition, but doesn't have to be. The church tradition with a capital T is consensus patrum, liturgical rites, ecumenical councils, creeds, and canons. All the books of the Bible, all the Testament were originally written in Hebrew, except we said the books, parts of the books of Daniel and Ezra. The Septuagint, that's another question that people got missed. I don't know why. I said in Judea, in Israel, people were using, before the exile, they were using a Hebrew Torah. The prophets didn't have the prophets at the time of exile, by the way. They only had the Torah, 5 books of Moses. After they came back, They had the Torah and the prophets, but they had the Hebrew and the Targum, which is the Aramaic, because now they're speaking Aramaic. But where was the Septuagint made and where was it used? In the diaspora, outside Judea. So the answer to this, the Septuagint is the Greek Bible that was used by the Jews in the diaspora, outside Judea. The Masoretic Bible was a hard work of Masoretic scribes in the 3 centuries BC. 3 centuries BC was the Septuagint, right? That's where it was, 300 years before Christ. In Alexandria, Egypt, the Septuagint required the work of 72 scribes. Septuagint. This is all Septuagint. What was the Masoretic? Masoretic was compiled and edited between 6th and 10th century after Christ. What is the Masoretic? What's the Masoretic? It is the Hebrew version that New King James and King James and all the Bibles that you have today is translated from. The Masoretic is the copy, is the original that your Bibles that you use, except your Orthodox Study Bible or the one that we use on Mengalia, these are Septuagint. But the regular Bible that you buy from the markets, those Bibles are made or translated from the Masoretic, 6th to 10th century AD. We talk about the community at Qumran, which is the Dead Sea Scrolls, that their library contained many books of the Bible. The community used only the Hebrew books of the Bible? No, they didn't find just Hebrew. The community used only the Septuagint? No, they had both of them. The community had both Hebrew and Septuagint? Yes. The community had the Masoretic version of the Bible? Absolutely not. Because when was that? This community lived 300 BC all the way to the time of Christ. They believed St. John the Baptist lived in this community. It's where he was in the desert. Some of them were very austere in their ways. They would fast many days. So the right answer to this, they had a collection in their library of different translations, Septuagint and Hebrew, but not the Masoretic. Why not the Masoretic? Because the Masoretic was not at their time. It came much later. How many years later? 600 years later, after they got done living there. All the following books are narrative books except Numbers, Deuteronomy, 1st and 2nd Kings, Nehemiah. Which one is non-narrative? It has to be one. They're all having history, have some story to say, except one that doesn't have that story. Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the book of the law. It's all about laws. They call it Deuteronomos, means the second law, so it doesn't have too much story to tell. The rest of them is history, is story. Match, Proverbs, it's under the book Wisdom and Poetry. Leviticus is Torah. Hosea, prophets. Ruth, history. This is different, 4 books from the 4 different branches in the Septuagint. The translation accepted by the Orthodox Church is Good News Translation? Nonsense, don't use that at all. The New King James Version? Yes, that's the one we should use. That's the one that we use in the church. Then the new, New Living Translation? No, it's very close to the GNT. NIRV, the new International Revised Version with the additional books and additions from the Septuagint. Every of them has the additions, and this is so. I think the one that we use is an NKJV, the New King James Version. I think we're done now. We go into the second one.